quick story. Last night, working tirelessly over this, I was so tired I forgot to email my talk to my computer this morning. So I've done this in my freeze, so bear with me. Right. So my talk is on the rise and fall of a billionaire gangster. Right. The reason for my choosing of the title. Great song. And the reason for my choosing of the title is the two words billionaire and gangster seem to, get people's interest. So hopefully you will find this talk enlightening, particularly if you have plans on becoming a drug dealer yourself. Ross, I'm looking at you here. Right. So this talk is designed to be an informant because originally I did plan on having some critical analysis. But that totally backfired. Really backfired. So my talk is going to be about this guy. Oh, that's my name. Frank Lucas. He's arguably New York's most notorious black gangster, and he essentially ruled the streets in the late 1960s and 1970s. In the next 20 minutes, my aim, if there is an aim, is to firstly show how crime could be considered appealing for the typical southern black youth, and secondly to show how the Vietnam conflict was profitable for certain individuals, such as Frank. Now, you are probably wondering, who is he? Well, have any of you seen the film American Gangster? Okay! Has anyone heard of it? Denzel Washington? Guy knows, okay. Right, then you'll... Well, none of you know who it was. So he was born on the 9th of September 1930 in La Grange, which is situated within North Carolina, so it's a southern state. His early years were spent living in a one-room shack shared with his parents and younger brothers. So they weren't exactly living the high life. Right, being the genius that I am, I've drawn up that's the only slide with words on it. Why I believe the three main reasons why I believe he was introduced to crime. So he has, as I said, he has very humble origins. His family were incredibly poor. His parents, as crop cutters, were on a pitiful salary. They lived, as I mentioned, a one-room shack, and they slept on a straw pallet on the floor. With the way things were back then, it was unlikely they were ever going to secure a moderate wage. The murder of his cousin, Obadiah, according to Lucas, this was the prime reason for his descent into crime. It happened in the summer of 1936, and so he was 6, and he witnessed a group of KKK members come round to his house, and his cousin went outside, and they tied him up and basically put a bullet through his head, because the alleged reasoning was that he was recklessly eyeballing a white girl. So Frank was, Obadiah was 13 years old, so that's a very young age, and Frank was 6, and he, with his own eyes, witnessed this. So at a very early age, he was exposed to what some might say, the horrors of the world, and the disruption of family life. So after his cousin's funeral, Frank's father went to the local sheriff, and the sheriff, in much more grimmer words, which I probably can't say, he told him to get out or face arrest. And Frank was... Hello.
Sorry,
No problem. That gives me a second to actually understand what I'm talking about. So, Frank's father was understandably very concerned that his nephew's killers weren't being brought to justice. So, and then after leaving the station, he threatened to kill the sheriff. And hearing about this through the grapevine, the sheriff went over to Frank to see Frank's father, and it escalated quickly into a brawl, which resulted in the sheriff getting a bullet in his leg. So Frank's father, fearing, his life pretty much, he's just shot a sheriff, he fled to the woods. So, what did it mean? Frank was considered the oldest male in the house. He had younger brothers, he had a mum to provide for. They weren't, as I said, on a great wage at all. So he felt it was his duty to be the man of the house. And so this began his crime. His life of crime began at the age of 6. To keep food on the table, he started robbing petty livestock. Petty? livestock such as chickens, and then this eventually moved on to robbing goats and pigs. So before long, at the age of 9, his crime lifestyle escalated further. And he began to hang outside bars and brothels and robbing what he considered the easy targets, such as the drunkards. So, in a short space of time, he was clubbing these guys with bats and then robbing them. He was a bit of a... and then from the age of 9, these crimes, soon got even worse. And eventually, he has to leave town. He's just committed his first serious offence, which was robbing a general store and stealing, I think it was $400, which was quite a lot at that time. So he had to escape before anyone knew it was him. But eventually, his crime caught up with him. He got given his first sentence, which was an indefinite sentence. And this was because he was robbing all the hustlers outside, I think it was Kentucky. And the indefinite sentence, he went to work with a chain gang. So it's basically just a group of black people, basically, in chains, digging ditches, okay? And but luckily for him, a prisoner called Jimmy Reed took sympathy on him and helped him escape. Now, the method of escape is pretty complex, and some inferior minds among you won't be able to understand it, so I won't go into it. I don't even understand it myself. So, jumping a few months into the future, Frank is 13. He's been living, this is great, under the roof of an older woman in return for sexual favours. So finally he moves on and begins working in a pipe factory, but makes a quick getaway after an employee walks on Frank and the boss's daughter basically messing about. Now, you'll learn about Frank, the guy is a player, the guy is a don, no. But realising that, this was not good, he's been caught by his another employee, and the boss, if you think back to his cousin's situation, he got done for recklessly eyeballing a white girl, and Frank was probably in fear of his life. So he moved on, and so that's really the end of his early childhood. And now from this point on, he starts to make a name for himself in New York. So at 14, he touches down in Harlem, which in 1944 was pretty much 100% black. So how does he make a living? He begins by doing what he usually did, robbing pedestrians, making easy money, and then he learns about all the illegitimate lotteries being conducted on the streets. So they're called number runners, yeah. And he starts robbing them, as they were very flashy, and they always had tons of cash on them. So, but before long, he gets into the drug game, which he's most infamous for, and he had been noticing that drug dealers were pocketing big money, and due to the connection he makes from his robbery days, he gets into it himself. So he continues this for 3 years, where according to him, this is utter BS. Okay, in my opinion, he made $500,000 worth. You'll learn this guy likes to inflate as well for a lot, so you can't really take anything for granted with him. But before long, he loses it all to gambling debts, drug debts, and he's been spending all his money on flashy cars, really. So, hello. Not everyone knows that he's into loads of debts, and no one really wants to work with him. So his name starts to carry a bad reputation, and to pay off these debts, he goes back to robbing, and eventually he gets caught, and he gets a 9-month sentence in a jail known as the Tombs. So on release, he doesn't stop. His robberies increase in frequency and scale, and at one point he robbed a diamond store at gunpoint, and I pocketed out quite a lot. But Harlem was full of these gangsters, and they all seemed to congregate in one place called the Big Track. Now the big track was, I think it was like a gambling den where they all used to play pool and stuff, and Frank, being both stupid, fearless, whatever you want to call it, decides to go in here and rob them. And when I say they were, I don't know, yeah, they were really bad. Okay, they were bad people. So
moral dimension.
They were bad. Yeah, they
Objective analysis.
no, they were responsible for. They were drug dealers. They were murderers. They were like considered, the top of the Harlem gangster society at the time. And so yeah, Frank, without a mask on or anything, he decides to go in there and say, "Look, fellas, I want your money, and in the meantime, can you take your clothes off for me?" So they take their clothes off for him. It was just to further humiliate them. He wanted to make a name for himself, and so he could be badder than them. So so let's just say Frank was operating on borrowed time. He there's several hits were placed out on him, and it was only a matter of time before he wound up dead. So half of Harlem's underworld wanted him dead, and but not only this, it's a pretty epically horrible period in his life. This girl that he's been messing about with ends up being pregnant with twins, and Frank is 17 at this point, and he's not ideally the most suitable father, so he's pretty worried about this. Now he hits a pretty desperate place. He's got no money on him. He's just living about living on the street essentially, and he considers contract killing. And there's a guy going around called his name's his gangster name is an Ice Pick Red, and the reason why because it's called Ice Pick Red because when he kills people, he leaves an ice pick in them, hence his name. So Frank goes up to him like, "You're right, mate," and Ice Pick just spits on him and just walks off. So that's the end of that. But so he doesn't end up going to contract killing. So but he sees Ice Pick a few days later. It's at this pool place, and Ice Pick's there anyone want to wager $1,000 on a game? And Frank, being poor, right, according to him, he's a don at pool, yeah, but he's got no money, so he can't meet the wager. But then this guy called Bumpy Johnson walks in, and Bumpy Johnson. Have any of the history teachers heard of this guy? Okay.
He always used to live with Bump, didn't he?
Yeah, there's a reason why. Yeah, he's called Bumpy because his bump on the back of his head. That's where he got his name. But so since none of you know, who was Bumpy Johnson? He was Harlem's unofficial crime boss. He was a numbers runner, bootlegger, drug dealer, and he ran numerous protection rackets. He was considered the main Harlem associate of the Genovese. I said that right. Anyway, mafia family. So no, he was associating with pretty upper scale crime. So if you wanted to do something, you had to pass it through Johnson first. So no one wanted to cross his path. His brother was accused of killing a white man, and Johnson was well known for his short temper and just general hatred of the whites. So whether this is true or not, I say this because Johnson's wife denies it, and there's conflict. Frank believes that he was. Frank became his personal driver for 15 years, and in this time he moves up in basically in the crime world, and eventually becomes Bumpy's Johnson's second in command. Now, it all started off relatively mediocre. Pretty boring stuff, but Johnson, as every top gangster that seemed to be doing at the time ran legitimate businesses as well. And it took a vast amount of months before Frank was thrown into the juicy stuff. Now, after gaining Johnson's trust, Frank began having access to Johnson's meetings, and Johnson met up with people such as the heavyweight boxer Joe Louise at the time or something, and also with the gangster. I completely forgot about this. That's Bumpy Johnson, okay, not the best looking guy, really, is he? No. And then he's also meeting up with that's Frank Williams. There we go. He's Johnson. This guy Red, who is later known as Malcolm X, has been having it's like the whole cavalry has been having meetings with Bumpy just about life pretty much. So after earning Johnson's trust, Frank was given his own numbers den, and whilst the salary was pretty good, Frank didn't want this. I was going to say safe, but that's probably not the right word. This comfy job, he was quite a ruthless guy, and he wanted to make a bigger name for himself. So he wanted to be out there hitting the jackpot, really, doing things big. So the process of hitting the jackpot came about when associates of Johnson's was killed by none other than our man Icepick. And, he just randomly comes up and just, So he kills Johnson's associate. And Johnson was absolutely furious, and in retaliation, with the help of Frank, he tied up Icepick and poured fire ants, allegedly, into his eyes, and left him there to die. Now, oh dear, I've lost my other sheep. This is great. In 1960, so Frank is 30 at this point, he gets his first lengthy prison sentence. I think he served about 6 on several occasions, but I think like 10 years ago in an interview he said, okay, we did actually do it. And he did this by having false bottoms in the back of coffins, so when regular drug raids were raided on the place, they seemed to not be able to find them. So in the meantime, as he's making all this money, he decides to do what his mentor Johnson did, and that was to turn to legitimate businesses. So he has several restaurants, and where he's making a good working wage. And he also decides to get married to another woman, and they have kids. Now, Frank at this point he claims he was making $1 million a day, but several people have said this is a gross estimate, and that he liked to inflate his wealth a lot. But he was making serious money, and this meant that New York at this time, there were a lot of corrupt cops, and one of them, going by the name of Babyface, decides to blackmail Frank, and he wants several keys of heroin for him to sell himself. So, as well as running all these the criminal operations, it's important to keep the corrupt police officers on your side, as they could really screw you over. And then Frank's own family want to get involved in his illegitimate enterprises. So his brothers want to get involved, and bearing in mind they have the name obviously as Lucas, they were operating as small drug dealers themselves, as it carried a lot of weight, the name. And just a quick story to throw out there. Frank's nephew was a really good baseball player, and Frank, he had lots of connections at this point, and Frank organised a private session with the Yankee recruit, but his cousin didn't show up. His cousin didn't show up, and he had been at the time been involved in drugs, and he wanted to be a part of Frank's business. Now he's spending all his wealth on cars and stuff, but he dressed apparently pretty toned it down quite a bit, and he goes to an Muhammad Ali fight. I can't remember who he was fighting. I think it was like, I don't know, it he was in the east of America somewhere, and not east, west, sorry. And these gangsters came up to him because Frank is dressed in his tracky bottoms pretty much, and they come up to him like, "Oh, I've heard a lot about you," and they were basically judging him by the way he dressed, and they were thinking he was a bit of a peasant, and they were in their in their mink coats, which Frank didn't like, and then he invited them to New York for the Frazier and Ali fight, and to prove them how much of a boss he really was, how much of a champ he was. He forked out apparently $200,000 on a chinchilla coat, and he gets ringside seats at the Ali match, and Frank Sinatra was there, and he didn't even get ringside seats. And at the time, because of the FBI weren't really they didn't know who Frank Lucas was too much, so he's at ringside seats, and he makes a bet with a friend, $500,000 apparently, that Ali would win. And it turns out the people in between them were FBI agents, and so you've got this guy coming in a chinchilla coat on ringside seats, and forking out $500,000 on a bet, and because he was black, they were not that means anything. No, that they were like, this guy, who is he? We need to investigate him. So the police involvement increases, the FBI involvement, and in the 1975, the feds storm his place, and he gets charged with conspiracy to distribute heroin. And he was storing all his money in his houses. He wasn't really putting it in banks, and the corrupt cops were basically rooting about in his house, and they steal $11 million worth of money. So this he later used to get him off some charges, and he was eventually acquitted of all charges in relation to the distribution of heroin. But shortly after, there was another trial, and he got 40 years in prison. And in the meantime, his brothers were arrested. And there was this guy called Richie Roberts, who was an assistant prosecutor at the time, and said, "Look, we can get you off, just turn in the corrupt police." So Frank turns informant pretty much. He says he never grasped on his Harlem associates, but he did basically give names of corrupt police officers, such as Babyface, but that wasn't his name. But so 6 years into his 40-year bid, he gets let off in 1981, and but shortly after, again, he was arrested, and he was given a 7-year sentence, and but he got off again for basically turning informant, and but he was on a lifetime parole, and he had several violations, and because I haven't come this one, because of his lifetime parole, he broke it, and he got involved in the drugs slightly again, just to make quick money, because at this point the FBI have confiscated everything. Apparently $50 million was confiscated, and he had at least 5 times that in estates, in property, and that was all confiscated. So he's really poor, and he needs to do something, because he's got about 7 kids at this point. So he needs to do something for them. So he gets back into the drug business. In the meantime, violating his parole, and there's a massive hearing. He can face lifetime for this, but he comes up with some legendary sob story about how he just wants to care of his mother, how it will change, and how it will return to religion. So he got off, and he had to serve the minimum of 6 months in prison. So so he serves 6 months in prison, gets out, becomes a Christian, looks after his mother. He's got no money at this point, does the occasional interview, and then Hollywood came at his doorstep saying, "We want your story for the making of the film American Gangster." And so he does American Gangster, and apparently Denzel Washington, who played Frank, bought him a Rolls Royce or something, just for being able to play it or something. And yeah, but the film itself caused controversy because it sort of painted Frank in this positive light, when in matter of fact he was a very violent, aggressive man. He was probably responsible for killings that that no one knows of, and yeah, he was an all-time bad guy. So yeah, that's pretty much it. He was a really good friend of him, so there's this connection with hip hop. Hit me with your questions. Hey, that's great. Yeah.
So what are the sources for your...
No, as I said before, Frank Lucas was known for inflating his career, really. And there've been lots of conflicting statements, but the truth is, we actually don't really. There's no way to find out the concrete evidence. We just have to take.
So where did you get your information from?
I got my information from his side of the story, from
From where?
because he's written an autobiography, okay? No, but also, as I've mentioned, Johnson's wife she brought out on a book about it, about how he was all wrong. So you can't really take anything can't take anything too seriously with this guy. But he was New York's most notorious black gangster. So he did have a name for himself.
According to whom?
No, according according to police reports and everything.
You said yourself the FBI hadn't heard of it.
No, yeah, the FBI had
It's like this guy's godfather.
No, because Harlem was.
The film and his autobiography and some bitter ex-wife.
Yeah, no. The FBI, when they say, he was well known among the black population in Harlem, and pardon.
According to who?
No, because several people. There's loads of accounts of him.
What? Give a name.
What do you mean give a name I don't know. That guy that lives down the road from him.
Well, Concealed Danger is essentially, you said already.
Yeah. I did say.
Like to be what are they associated with? Are they associated with the myth of
Yeah.
this person?
There
Is
is.
this myth created? Is it created at the time? Is it contemporary? Or is it created later when gangsterism becomes almost romanticised? In fact, it's almost turned into a cartoon in the 90s, which arguably is to do with, as black communities, African American communities, more integrated, you can't become more than a class. In a sense, they can look back at their past and almost turn these figures into Robin Hood type myths, rather than actually representing any real insight into what is going on in the 50s and 60s.
Yeah.
You have the same problem with Goodfellas. Henry Hill, the character who is Goodfellas is based on, the entire story all fits together, but again, we just don't know how much it's true, because you have all these people denying that any of it is true.
Yeah.
And it's almost people's obsession with gangsters allows them to override the sort of utter lack of any credible evidence.
I mean, that there are. I don't think he was like. There's no denying, no sources. Okay, I did actually look this up. Have denied him being who he was. It's just, as you said before, about the glamorizing of it. I think, especially after the film came out, people he kind of painted him as like a Robin Hood figure, and yeah.
Do you get any sense of how many people were actually intelligent, or are they able to accomplish what they accomplish, not because of any sort of great brains, but because they are just so daring?
Yeah, exactly.
When you read the autobiography in the book, did you get the impression you were dealing with someone who actually was someone who was very, very clever, or were you just dealing with someone who was prepared to be so much more unpleasant than everyone else that they managed to succeed?
Yeah, no. He was a very ruthless. He comes across as being very ruthless a persistent guy who wants to be better than everyone else and thus better than everyone else. And also, I think that he didn't intelligent. Like when you talk about him being like, was he clever or who had a great mind? I think he was just very street wise, and it's from the age of 6 he had got into crime, so he knew when an opportunity became apparent, and he capitalised on it. Yeah. And
how has Frank contributed to gangster culture as a whole?
Come on, Frank. How have you contributed to gangster? What would you mean exactly by gangster culture?
There's a current trend at the moment in America to do with gangster culture, involving people wearing their trousers quite low down.
Oh, right. You mean like that? Yeah. Okay. I think that's like a mainstream image painted by by just like, I don't know, like music or something. I think has contributed more to that than anything. Frank himself, he he wasn't wearing his trousers then. He was. The gangsters back then seemed to, rather than like wearing bandanas and like, I don't know, blaring out hip hop music in their Escalades or something, they were very. They like to consider themselves as businessmen. If you think, like dressing up, pretty sharp and stuff like that. Yeah, that answers your question. I don't think it's music.
So he's more akin to a 30s gangster than that.
Yeah. I know. I was thinking of like the Prohibition gangsters, and like really like smart in a sense in appearance. Yeah.
How much did his action of the names from corrupt police change the police? How the police was run?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
He gave out quite a lot of names to police while he was in prison. Did that change the way the police was run? And is that change still empowered today?
I think what it really did was just highlight how corrupt the police was at the time. So obviously they rooted out all the named individuals, and I'm pretty sure corruption still goes on in the police in particularly bad areas, but I think at the time there was when they got rid of them there was less corruption. And that's
corruption now, or less?
No. Well, there's always going to be corruption. But I'm not sure about how much of a scale it affected it, because it's just basically in one place really, that in Harlem, that was where they all were, and it just basically relieved Harlem of the police who were actually gangsters themselves.
So corruption wasn't national; it was just local.
Well, no, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I was referring to like the local aspect of it, so I don't really know about the situation on a national basis. I'm assuming it was pretty similar in places like California, Atlanta, and areas like that. Yeah.
What's the relationship between the US government and the organised crime unit?
Is this the bit where I go like slip my
generally
wrist?
in the 60s, obviously you must have cooperated in some way with the state. If you worked in Vietnam, so how did he cooperate? Did he have any effect on the political process at the time?
No, I don't think so.
Surely being so well.
Yeah.
Just run away.
No, I know, but I don't think there was any relation. Oh, well, that's over with.
He's not